So recently my man Rick Beato was talking to David Gilmour and he goes, "You came up with the most famous chord in rock history." To which David responds, "Well, technically it's an arpeggio." And so this got me thinking, well, what is the most famous chord? Today we're looking at 4 chords that would be strong candidates for that distinction. So the first chord that we got to talk about is the Hendrix chord. It's the first chord in this progression. And so that chord is technically an E7 sharp 9. And we call that the Hendrix chord. See, Jimmy used that chord in a lot of places. Stone Free, Purple Haze, Foxy Lady are a few that come to mind. And this chord just sounds mean, funky, pleasantly confused. And to understand what's going on with it, we gotta dissect it a bit. An E7 by itself is a pretty standard 4-note chord. When we look at the chord tones, our lowest note is the root. Then we have a major 3rd, perfect 5th, and flat 7. I'll make a quick note here. If what I'm saying sounds like I'm speaking a completely different language, I did just put out a video on music theory for guitarists if you need to get caught up. But a chord with the root, 3rd, 5th, flat 7 is quite common. But one of the cool things you can do is you can start sprinkling notes on top of chord tones to give it some additional flavor. And often you'll see an F sharp added to this chord. But with our Hendrix chord, you're adding a note that is a half step higher than an F sharp. You're adding the G to the chord. Call this note the sharp 9, E7 sharp 9. And this sharp 9 extension is less common, but it's super cool, and here's why. If we went back and removed the G from the equation, this chord is pretty happy, it's pretty upbeat. But if you brought that G note back in and removed the major 3rd, the G sharp, you get something that's significantly darker and minor in tonality. But when you have both of these notes within the chord, you essentially have these two opposite musical moods butting up against each other within one chord. And this musical tool comes up a lot in the blues, which is at the heart of what Jimi Hendrix did. See, the blues was born out of a deep suffering, but the artist would take that and turn it into joy in their life through music. And this Hendrix chord is the perfect musical metaphor for this. You have minor and major mixed together. Pain and sadness, joy and suffering. And Jimmy was by no means the first person to play this chord. In fact, in a lot of jazz standards, you see this chord used quite a bit as a movement chord. Whereas with Hendrix, he would sit on this chord. The musical spotlight was shining on it. And using it this way, using it as much as he did, and with the impact that he had, this chord became his. So this guitar that I'm using today has got to be one of the coolest acoustic guitars on the market. This is the TAG3C by Yamaha, who's sponsoring this video. See, everything you hear me playing is coming from the actual guitar. There's no effects pedals, no loop station. And the way that it works is so cool. It's got these mechanisms called actuators within the body that take the natural vibrations and use those to create chorus, reverb, delay, which then get projected out of the guitar itself. With this guitar, Yamaha has made huge leaps with this technology, and it's so cool hearing these sounds come out of the guitar itself. But I think the coolest thing about this is the ability to create loops, and when you see me hitting that circle, that's controlling that feature. For gigging, practicing, jamming, this is such a valuable tool to have with no wires attached. And it's super simple to control from the panel on the guitar, but you can also pull up the companion app to get deeper into the features. And of course, the guitar itself is a great instrument. Sounds lovely, solid wood, high level of craftsmanship, easy to play. What more can you ask for? For more information on this beauty, I got a link in the description. Anyways, let's get back to it. Next, we got the James Bond chord. It just makes you want to go spy and drink martinis and piss off your buddies by picking Odd Job in GoldenEye 64. But this chord is just so perfectly used. Bond movies start off with some fast-paced action scene, theme song plays, and then this chord rings out to set up the rest of the movie. And if I were to describe this chord like a sommelier does wine, it's unresolved, rich, distinct mystery with a sense of cool. A description that would also aptly fit James Bond. It's just such a brilliant musical device. And so what we have here is a minor major 9 chord. And if you were to break down which notes are in this chord, you have root, flat 3rd, 5th, major 7, natural 9. This is a tense, dark 5-note chord, and the music theory for why it creates this feeling is really quite interesting. The bottom 3 notes of this chord give us a minor triad, which create that dark flavor. But I wouldn't say those three notes have a whole lot of tension. Musical tension sounds like this. And this gets into this bigger musical concept. Certain notes have this sense of gravity. They kind of pull things towards them. And that gravitational force affects some notes more and some notes less. And you can think of the root note in a chord as a note with a strong sense of gravity. It's pulling things towards it. The gravitational force that the root note has on the flat third and the fifth is existent, but it's not especially strong. Whereas if you took a note that's a half step lower than the root or a whole step higher, you're really feeling that gravitational pull. And so with the James Bond chord, we get that minor stability with the bottom three notes. But then we bring in the tension with the major 7 and the 9. So now you have this sense of mystery in this cool dark chord, which just perfectly sets up a James Bond movie. Now in the jazz world, the closest thing someone has to ownership of a chord has got to be those Bill Evans So What chords. See, in 1959, Miles Davis's Kind of Blue came out, and it was a defining moment in music history. To this point, the general trajectory of jazz was to get faster and more complicated. But you see this so often. There's these trends, and then there's this equal and opposite reaction force. That comes in the form of the album Kind of Blue, which starts off with the song So What. After a short intro, the groove kicks in with the bass player playing, to which the piano player, Bill Evans, responds. And this is not like the jazz before. There is a monumental shift. Jazz went from being red hot to being cool, blue, and groovy. It's the same voicing, two different chords, and suddenly the genres change forever. What Bill is playing here is an E minor 11, followed by a D minor 11. It's the same chord played a whole step apart, and if we look at the notes within this chord, we have root, flat third, fourth, fifth, flat 7. But it's the way that Bill organizes these notes that adds the real brilliance. The root's on the bottom, then up a perfect fourth to the fourth. This is also known as the 11th. Then up another perfect fourth to the flat 7, up another perfect fourth to the flat third, and then up a major third to the 5th. And so we see 3 perfect fourths played throughout this chord. And just take a second and think about what that perfect fourth sounds like. And to me, that's airy and spacious, whereas something like this is cluttered and dense. And so this perfect fourth interval that's used so much within this chord creates that breathiness, that sense of space. You couple that with the slow tempo of the song, the groove, the sparsity of the arrangement, and it just sets this incredible mood unlike anything else that had ever come before it. Finally, we have the most famous chord by the most famous band, the Hard Day's Night chord by the Beatles. Man, that doesn't really do it justice. Let's try that again with a full arrangement. That's much better. When the Beatles and George Martin went to record the song Hard Day's Night, they knew that this song was not only going to kick off the album, but it was also going to be the intro to the movie. They wanted something strong and impactful, and having this chord ring out by itself did just that. And this chord has fascinated people for years, partly because when you have all these instruments playing at the same time, it's kind of hard to figure out who's doing what. But then you also have these strange physics things going on that make this chord essentially impossible to recreate perfectly. But the most commonly accepted theory is that George is playing an F add 9 on a 12 string, John Lennon playing that same chord on an acoustic, Paul McCartney's hitting the high D on his bass, George Martin is playing a D, G, D on the piano, and Ringo is lightly hitting the snare and the ride cymbal. And so in total, the notes that we have here are D, F, A, C, G. And those 5 notes in a chord are pretty cool. It's not the most common thing, but it's also nothing too insanely crazy. But what makes this chord so great is the way that it's arranged amongst the instruments. And then when you get these sound sources playing at the same time in the same room, the waves start doing really interesting things to each other. Even something like Paul's bass note apparently ringing out in John Lennon's acoustic guitar, which was getting picked up by the pickup, that's said to be one of the things that creates that waviness within the chord. And you put this all together and it creates this incredibly unique and interesting sound that's
as close to musical magic as you're ever gonna find.
Ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Those are the most famous chords. If you think there are any others that should have been on this list, let me know in the comments. And don't forget, you can learn more about this incredibly cool guitar, the Yamaha TAG3C, using the link that's in the description. As always, thank you all for watching. Look after yourselves, look after each other, look after the planet. I'm Samurai Guitarist, and I'll see you again soon. All right, check this out. I got a little teaser for everybody who's made it this far in the video, but for the last little while, I've been working on one of the coolest, biggest things I've ever done in my life, and it's getting close to being announced. So stay tuned for more details.